Hi, everyone. It's Andy. Just waiting a minute for everyone to join here. I forgot I got this severe backlighting problem. I'm going to go fix that. I'll be right back. All right.
Hey guys.
Well, Alex, just waiting for everyone to finish joining here.
Okay. Long day.
Yeah, we're in the home stretch.
Yes, yes. So where do you live at, Andy?
I'm in Edmonds.
Oh, okay. It's smoky over there too?
Pretty bad. Pretty
Yeah.
bad.
Well, I got a little bit of sun today. It wasn't blue sky, but it was a little clearer today than it was yesterday. So I was pretty happy about that.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Friday, I guess, now they're saying. Might clear out a little bit.
Oh, really? Oh, no. Oh,
I mean, around here anyway. I don't know about.
yeah. I was hoping like tomorrow.
Me too.
Yeah.
We're down to 153 on our reading.
Whoa.
That's
I
a
think we were
lighter
like,
color.
I think we were like 298 yesterday, and
Yeah.
we're probably about 250 right now. So,
It rained here this morning.
oh,
Totally
good.
unexpected. Yeah.
I saw the sun just a minute ago.
Oh, good. Good news. Rain, sun.
Wow. Have not seen the sun in days.
Yeah, we started the smoke, not as bad as it now, but I think the smoke started like this weekend or something, but we were already getting smoke from the Yakima. There's a big Yakima fire that was happening. So I live just east of there and we got all that smoke. So we were in smoke for a week before you guys saw any, which is no fun. So, but kind of getting used to it after 5 years of this stuff, kind of just get into that mode and try to get a lot more money over to natural resources departments and try to clean up those forests as best they can. Didn't get the money this year, but think we'll have a little more yeses on our side this time around. So
Hopefully.
Well, is this our group?
Yeah,
Andy,
I think this is most of us. I'm double checking my list, but it's most.
Some people might have dropped off.
Yeah, we're missing like one person, but I think this is most of us.
Well, I changed my background so you could think of me my facilitator hat on as opposed to my electricity tap expert. So I'm doing double duty. I do a lot of facilitation. So to cover all our bases, they put me into this role. So I'm here to help you guys unpack what we've heard, including what that other me said to you earlier. So yeah. So this is I know we're tired. It's been a long day, and Zoom is an incredibly engaging medium that keeps us glued to us for hours and hours. But yeah, this is a chance to really begin to just unpack some of your thoughts about what you saw sort of throughout the day, maybe some cross-cutting themes, but also where you think the questions that that Tom was putting out, where are we on the right track? Where do you have concerns? What alternative approaches should we be considering? And some of those have come out. And others of those I think we can talk about here in a smaller group. And Kent, we haven't heard much from you today, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. We had a good conversation with you, and I'm not sure we totally incorporated all of your ideas into our discussion, so good chance to sort of bring them forward, and some of the sort of flexibility issues that you need as a small, a rural co-op person was that, and yeah.
Well, I think, thanks, Mark, and it was a very interesting day today. I think the concept of flexibility is beginning to seep in, and I can appreciate that. And I can seriously appreciate the enthusiasm that I'm hearing for using the electricity resources from the state to decarbonize a lot of the economy. I think that is appropriate. I guess the one thing that I am still concerned about, and I believe we talked about this in our conversation, is that with the added emphasis on electricity, in the electricity sector, there needs to be a serious evaluation or a serious analysis of the what am I trying to say here? Of the availability. When you go around the region, of course, there's a lot of people in the electricity sector who are working hard at decarbonizing the electricity sector. That is undergoing, CETA is a major part of that. We were all involved in the development of CETA, and are working now on the WAC that will implement it and so forth. But the issue that keeps a lot of people in my business awake at night is resource adequacy. And we had a very good example of what happens when policy doesn't follow the appropriate approaches to this in California a few weeks ago with the rolling blackouts. Those of us in the industry had been seeing warnings from the operators and so forth to the regulators that, hey, there are these scenarios out there where this is going to happen, and the probability of those scenarios is increasing. And it eventually happened a few weeks ago. And of course, a lot of the politicos and those kind of folks immediately turned to the system operators and said, wow, that was surprising. You didn't let us know, or you didn't give us any warning that this could happen. And I think if we're really doing an energy strategy, we can come up with all these efforts or all these directions and all these ideas for decarbonizing the economy in Washington, and they're very appropriate, they're very good, they're very well thought out, but there needs to be, in parallel with that, some thinking, some analysis, or some provision in the strategy that makes sure that the electricity is going to be there when it's needed. Otherwise, people will look back years ahead in the future that when you have rolling blackouts in Washington because we have rolled so much of the state's economy into electricity dependence. And then you have a similar situation, and they're going to look back to this energy strategy and say, what were those idiots thinking? You know, they wanted to roll all this stuff over into electricity without providing the electricity capacity, the resource adequacy to support the energy strategy. And I'm not real sure that the folks putting together the energy strategy, at least the discussions within the advisory group, and I don't know what, you know, the Department of Commerce is actually thinking will go into the energy strategy. That is one thing that I keep waiting to hear somebody address, and it's just not there yet, and that's my concern. But you're right. A lot of the stuff that we talked about earlier is coming forward. The flexibility, the diversity that we talked about earlier. I'm pleased that part is being considered and being factored in. But I'm still waiting on the resource adequacy piece to materialize, and maybe it will. I don't know.
Well, if it doesn't work, we'll make sure everybody knows that you were on the advisory committee as one of the.
Hey, Mark, can I jump in and ask Kent a question?
Yeah, please do.
So I promise we won't spend too long on the electricity side. So we'll let others talk about other sectors. But so, you know, the regional, the language in the draft that we saw today talks a lot about, you know, west-wide markets and more regional coordination that will help with that. But could you see a role for, you know, doing some of that statewide and not necessarily closing our borders, but having a more statewide electricity management, breaking down some of our balancing authorities so that somebody is looking at the state as a whole and talking to the utilities and engaging in what the capacity resources are needed to meet different circumstances that would stress the system.
Well, yes, and I think some of that's already happening. You've got people like the Pacific Northwest groups who are studying that on a much, you know, rather than a west-wide, they're looking at it from a regional, because we are integrated. It's hard to just pick out Washington State because of the way the balancing authorities are established in the Northwest. So, but yeah, we're working that direction. There are studies that are coming out on that. You have a markets group doing that. The only concern that I see with developing a more robust market scenario is that it's going to provide a false sense of security, because what you'll end up with is you'll have somebody looking at a larger region, say the West. Say we put together a West Side, a full West Side markets group. And you look at that and you go, wow, look at all the capacity in there. And, you know, and if Washington needs some capacity, they can get it from Southern California and vice versa and so forth. And that can help for a while. But like this few weeks ago when California was doing its rolling blackouts, the intertie between the Northwest and California was maxed out. We were dumping so many electrons down that pathway. It was maxed out for days. If we had a similar weather event in the Northwest, we would have joined it. It was that bad. So I think there's got to be, with this coordination, and coordination is key to all this, but with this coordination needs to be a serious look at the adequacy, the resource adequacy. And I'm not the expert. I don't know how that needs to be put together, but it needs to be not only a generation but also a transmission adequacy provision that needs to be in there. It's just one of those things, like I said, that a lot of people are really concerned about. I can't remember, Nancy, were you at the Resource Adequacy Forum last October in Portland? Did you get a chance to attend that?
Wendy Ehrlitz from my office did. And
Yeah, it was,
Fred Hewitt. Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah, it was an awesome discussion, and I think we're going to have to start doing more of that, before too long, because that's just one thing I'm thinking. If you're doing a strategy, you're going to have to. I like the way the strategy's going. Don't get me wrong. I like the way it's going, but coupled with that needs to be, okay, if we're going to put this much responsibility on the electricity sector, we've got to prep the electricity sector to handle that. So that's my comment.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Kent, this is Alex.
Yes.
Let me read you a couple of comments. I've been writing emails to one of our other teammates that's not on this Zoom right now, but here's what I said to her about a week ago. Fires and blackouts in California again. The news as temperatures rise. In late afternoon, the sun goes down, hence no solar energy to keep up with demand. My opinion is that it is the nature of the beast California has created, not enough firm energy. They need firm energy, not intermittent energy, while the world develops energy solutions. When the world develops solutions, get rid of firm energy sources. And that was about a week ago. And then I wrote back and she gave me an explanation of what she thought. And I came back to her and I said, I just want to make sure that we have a reliable grid, which includes solar and wind. So I think it would be important for this group to analyze what issues are in California at the moment so we do not follow their example, brownouts and blackouts. I want solar in the grid. I'm not against it at all. I want the grid reliable. And so I guess I would tell you, yes, I'm with you.
Right. So we're hearing the theme of the reliable grid and resource adequacy, and very quickly sort of switching hats. We have done a lot of digging in that as we prepared our strategy, and it's kind of buried underneath that regional market coordination and integration of utility scale generation. But yeah, it's definitely a key cornerstone of being able to move forward, is to be able to have reliable energy. So we will certainly be unpacking that. But back to my facilitation. Other thoughts from people on Marty? Yeah, and Paul, welcome. Glad you joined us, and nice to see your face. And looking forward to your thoughts on this. Overall, how is it? What are your reactions? But let's hear from Marty first. Yeah.
Well, I'm ignorant on this point. Is there no state office that coordinates with the other states on passing energy around? Either industry office, Kent or Alex, do you know anything? And can we expand that as we need to, given the challenges we're anticipating with sharing energy?
Marty, that's what a balancing authority does. Some of these balancing authorities are small, others are much larger. For instance, like the BPA balancing authority actually reaches into 4 states and so forth. And these balancing authorities will get together and put together what they call markets. And these markets will share electricity, buy and sell it back and forth. They put together agreements so that they can share electricity on a moment's notice and settle up later, kind of thing. So those are under development. That's what we're talking about when we say a West Side Markets Group, and the California system operator, the ISO, what we call Cal ISO, kind of does that for the state of California. And there's utilities and balancing authorities in the state of Washington and in the state of Oregon that are planning to join that. So as those agreements continue to evolve over the next few years, you'll have a larger market group. So that is taking place just because the business model of like you say, the economies of scale make it a viable business model. And so that's being developed. But like I said, I don't think a region-wide markets group would have helped California a few weeks back, because the intertie between the Northwest and California was maxed out anyway, even without a full-fledged markets group out there. So it's a matter of having the generation and the transmission in the right place at the right time is what we're talking about when we're talking about resource adequacy. It's not necessarily the marketing or the sharing of electricity. That already happens.
But it sounds like it may not be mature enough to handle what we're anticipating the next 30 years. Is that what I thought I heard you say that, Ken? And
Yeah.
But it would be possible to develop it in the direction we need to as we determine what resources we need to achieve the resource adequacy. Is that?
And that's why I think that needs to be a portion of this energy strategy. You know, to decarbonize the economy, we're going to move energy into the electricity sector because it's cleaner than fossil fuels, you know, but at the same time, we need, part of this strategy needs to address having enough electric energy available to carry that load.
And
That was my point.
Problem before, we had really good firm energy with our dams. We have so much dam power here. It's very firm, you can turn it on a dime, which is great, except when you get interim the solar and wind in the system, then you have to have a little bit of flexibility in your pond behind your dams, which is your fuel. So some of that energy, at least for my BA, which has 2,000 megawatts capacity, we have to hold a little bit water just in case clouds come over the top and no more solar, or the wind quits blowing. So we have to cover that load that the wind and solar is trying to attain, even though they can't do it all the time. We cover for them as a particular BA. So Kent was right, each BA does their own thing. We have contracts with BPA, or I'm sorry, with PSE, who has a wind farm over on Ryegrass, so outside of Ellensburg. And so that's how they cover their power, is with Grant County covering their load, making sure that's there. But that's just our BA. We're not, other BAs aren't as lucky as us, where they don't have a dam. They have other types of generation, which isn't as nimble, and they can't turn on right away. It takes them maybe an hour to turn on a gas unit or coal plant or whatever they have. It takes a little bit while, and you can't just turn it on and off. So the industry has solutions for that for a little while until those other generation systems turn on in the WEC. And again, Kent's right. The WEC used to do all of that planning, but the WEC planning department went away, and many of the BAs are going to ISO, not all of them, but many of them are going to ISO, which is meaning it's a different planning organization. They did the transition. Kent last year, I think, is when it happened, when they did the big transition. But it's right in the middle of where everybody's integrating solar and wind into the grid, and everybody's in the same boat going, how are we going to back up wind and solar that's getting a bigger footprint in the WEC? And it's just really difficult to do, but from a BA standpoint, which is why Grant PUD, we actually isolated ourselves from the entire grid. So if the grid goes down, we can just isolate our generation and just keep it in our BA. So that's what our solution was, just because we saw it coming. We saw what was happening, and we did that.
So let's sounds like an electricity sector subgroup meeting here. Let's move on a little bit And certainly hear that loud and clear, the resource adequacy and reliability, making sure that we're addressing that in the strategy. Other thoughts, I wanted to ask Paul his perspective from the sort of local government point of view. And, you know, that certainly gets us a little bit more into implementation about sort of, where do you look at this, Paul, from your perspective, both of the strategy elements here and then the role that, you know, that local governments can play, or should be emphasized or addressed in what we're doing next.
So I apologize for being late. Thanks, Mark, for asking for our thoughts. Maybe you could tell me, because I'm late, when you say comments from a local government perspective, on what exactly are we kind of just reflecting on what we heard today?
Just this is really open, and we went down the, you know, the first discussion was about, I asked Kent, you know, his thoughts, and he brought the resource adequacy and electricity, but really sort of this is across all 4 sectors. We're not in any specific area. We're trying to get your reactions. We're trying to get your sense of where right track and concerns and approaches. So I think we've heard the alternative that we need to really make sure that the RA issues are addressed, and there's strong strategies in place to move forward there. So yeah, just kind of circulating around now to get other thoughts from others, and so that's where.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, from a local government perspective, we try to view these conversations or evaluate the conversations that we're having within kind of our scope of authority and responsibility. And so there's a lot that goes on in these discussions that really doesn't have much impact within kind of that realm. So I try not to comment on a lot of those things. Number one, again, it's not something that local governments typically deal with. And number two, I don't really have much expertise in those matters. So just thinking about the things that we do have some direct involvement in, or are directly affected by in a unique way, maybe more so than say, you know, other entities. I was really appreciative of a lot of the comments, especially around the electrification pieces that had to do with the equity considerations, sharing resources, sharing impacts, things like that. I thought those were really, really important, and I'm glad that they were brought out. Representative Ibarra said quite a few things about that, as did, I think, Will Einstein with PSE. At least those are the 2 that I remember that had really good comments. That's been an issue for many of our communities for several years, especially as we've kind of seen the development of the renewable energy infrastructure over time. And there are impacts associated with those projects within those communities. And the benefits are primarily kind of exported out of those communities to other areas. So that's an ongoing issue. I was really appreciative too of some of the comments around the permit streamlining. We do think that that's important, and that there are ways to create some efficiencies in the system. We're also really aware of the fact that there needs to be some regionalization around development and the permitting and review processes associated with those. It just really makes sense. And that some of these infrastructure projects, like when you're talking about transmission and large utility scale production, they do have, you know, they do have significance on a statewide level, and those considerations need to be part of the process. However, we do want to make sure that there is ample opportunity for local input, and that local input is taken seriously, and that there's some accountability built into the system for that reason. We also want to make sure that we've seen a trend over the last couple of years, especially around, say, distributed generation type projects and smaller scale projects that, again, were part of the conversation today. We really believe that local governments have the ability to effectively authorize and permit such projects and make decisions within their own communities about, you know, the placement of those projects and what sort of mitigations and other requirements should be part of the development of those projects. But there has been a push by some in the industry over the years, especially recently, to reclassify those projects as more of almost towards the same sort of classification of utility scale of a statewide significance, because the combination of, you know, lots of distributed generation over time, right, can have a similar impact, et cetera. And so there's been a push to include those in these statewide kind of permitting processes and providing those types of projects with the ability to usurp local authority like larger scale projects are. And we would resist that sort of action, and we'd be very concerned about any streamlining that took that sort of strategy or that sort of implication. So that would be a concern of ours. You know, the electrification of transportation obviously is very interesting to us. Counties actually maintain and operate the majority of the road systems and all the related infrastructure statewide. So we have a really big impact on the transportation system here in Washington. As we all know, you know, the way we fund transportation and the way we fund maintenance and construction of infrastructure is heavily based on fossil fuel taxes. And so looking at some really effective strategies to not just maintain status quo, but also, you know, allow those funding streams to grow that are not necessarily based on, you know, continuing the same sort of fossil fuel type taxes are going to be really important as a consideration along with that electrification. So I don't know that that was, you know, I kind of came in late to today's meeting as well. I've had a lot of conflicts today. I apologize for that. It's really hard to carve out a whole day when we've got so much going on. So I apologize. And I'm sure you guys struggle with the same sort of limitations, but I didn't necessarily see that as part of the transportation piece today. If it was, and I missed it, I apologize, but that's something that we really need to pay attention to. And if it wasn't included, I'd like to make a marker in the record on that one.
Yeah, thanks for those are great points. And I think you probably heard right and appreciate the time that you can contribute to this effort. And it isn't quite as central to you as it is to some other folks. But yeah, I'd say that these are good points to, you know, for the technical team to put in, and maybe something to follow up on is like, what's the way to sort of align the state policy around, you know, local permitting of distribution type and sub-transmission projects with sort of state policy frameworks without having usurp of authority. So invite you to think about that in this comment period and maybe suggest something for us to you know, follow up on. And then the financing issue is something we're going to get into at least a little bit more in the next phase. So that's a big tough nut to crack, but certainly we can't do this without bringing a lot more capital, a lot more operating funds, and some of that already exists in the utility sector, but a lot of that, you know, needs to be raised through, you know, through collective action of discussion about what's the best way to do that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, I was just going to ask you, Paul and Sandy, there was some discussion earlier today about kind of community redevelopment with an eye towards transportation, workforce development, new industries, kind of trying to help people live and work and engage without having to commute a long way. And as a strategy, part of the strategy to help with decarbonizing transportation. And I'm just wondering about your thoughts, Representative Ibarra, your thoughts also on that as part of the strategy, and how we would move something like that forward to make our communities more robust so that people don't have to commute long ways to get to work.
Yeah, you know, I'll jump in really quickly on that. And before I do, Mark, I just wanted to follow up really quickly as well. We'd also be really interested in participating in the conversations around making sure that the benefits of these projects are equitably distributed, especially with, you know, that those benefits are shared in the communities in which the projects are constructed and exist and operate. Sandy, I'm sorry, Nancy, that's an interesting question. You know, I remember that today in kind of in context of some broadband expansion, right, and investments in additional access to high-speed internet, and that being maybe a tool to aid with some of that. This pandemic in some ways has really, I think, opened a lot of our eyes to the possibilities associated with technology and remote workplaces, and whether or not it's really necessary for people to commute the distances that they currently are to the workplace on a daily basis, or if there are alternatives to that sort of structure. You know, my suspicion is that this this crisis that we're facing now is going to actually fundamentally change the workplace, and really fundamentally change people's workspaces. And if we're able to provide access, especially in more remote areas, to high-speed broadband, that it will have a major impact on reducing vehicle miles traveled, which will have a major impact on reaching, the greenhouse gas emission reduction goals that the state has set for itself. So I think there's enormous potential there. I think it would be great for rural residents and rural areas. It does lead to a lot of questions, again, around transportation infrastructure and how do we maintain that and what are our funding sources for it. So we would have to rethink that in many ways. But it would also level the playing field for a lot of less populated areas now who maybe don't have access to the high speed internet and other technology that's needed for economic development, that areas, like the greater Puget Sound region are so well equipped to continue to build upon, right? So I think that there's numerous benefits that are associated directly with this project, as well as other kind of value added benefits that we could all be taking advantage of. That's kind of my initial assessment of that. And I would certainly end my comments there and invite Representative Ibarra and Sandy to jump in.
I'd like to hear from Sandy maybe first, and then Representative Ibarra. Yeah, Sandy. Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you, Paul, for your comments, and Nancy for your question. So I put on my city of Richland hat rather than the electric utility aspect, and I think about economic development and wanting to attract businesses to our area. Part of the siting of those is in North Richland, and right now the infrastructure is roads. And I do know one of the things that the city is doing in its transportation plan. Our Public Works Department has had a lot of public interaction and interest from groups, particularly the cycling folks, because we do have so many ways people want to get around using bicycles. And so that's actually been built in to the transportation plan to get people around. I likewise think with Paul, when I mentioned earlier in my comments during the first session, I didn't really know where the pandemic aspect fit. What I was also thinking is, you're also, buildings are going to be empty. I'm shifting gears, Nancy, from the transportation, but I think this ties into it. These are all connected, and we understand that. If people are going to be working from their homes, then they're going to be empty buildings. And that can also affect the economy as well, because the landlords, the businesses, I'm lacking words here, but the businesses that, real estate businesses are going to have some challenges as building owners look to divest themselves of properties that they don't need. And again, that also creates opportunity. So how can we repurpose that as well? There are a lot of challenges.
Thanks for those comments. Representative Ibarra?
Sure. I'd just like to say, everybody's different. Every community is different. Richland is way different than Ellensburg and Seattle and Quincy. When we had the pandemic, we're actually one of the highest cases of coronavirus in the state at the moment. I think we were highest we were like at 1,000 per 100,000 for a while. And the reason is because we're an agricultural community where 95% of our workers were essential workers. So nobody really quit working other than the barber, we have one in town. But hardly everybody was working, and they're all coming from different towns, from Ellensburg, from Moses Lake, from all over the place. And it's really difficult to get to Quincy just to work and then leave, which is why Corona was so bad, because we're getting cases from all over the place, and they come and work here, then they leave. And they bring it here, then they leave. And unfortunately, that's how it goes. transportation wise, we've got one bus that comes through town. It goes through Wenatchee to Quincy to Moses Lake to George and back. One bus all day long. And in order to get that amount of workers over to my town just to work is really, really, really difficult. And every town's different. It's like Richmond's got a great roadway system. Can't ever get around there because there's too many spaghettis. But spaghetti roads in there. But it's got a great road system. They got 3 cities right in a row where they can do a lot of busing and things like that. But in towns like Quincy, just doesn't work, just because there's just not enough people to come into town, 30 miles away or 40 miles away just to work. So they take their cars. So that's the hard part. Everybody's just different.
So I think sort of the theme of how do we actually make this transition happen, economic development, and really the individuality and unique circumstances of our different communities, that's a good things to, address. Other thoughts about where we're on the right track or alternatives that we haven't considered that ought to be considered? What else is on people's mind? Sandy? Yeah.
I've got one more. And as I'm looking at the questions, where do we have concerns? Where do I have concerns is some of the feedback. I don't see the slide number. My eyes aren't working that well. But in the buildings aspect, achieving the 2030 targets requires rapid technology shift. I had a wow response when I looked at achieving 50% of high efficiency technology by 2025 and 100% by 2030. That's a pretty big goal. And I know we don't want to get into the tactics, but that is where my mind goes. And I guess the concern I have is, how do we make it happen? How do we put those policies? What policies do we put in place in order to achieve that? Or do we adjust the expectation?
Yeah, I think that's a big question, and certainly the 2030 targets that the state has are challenging because of the cleanness of our grid already, and the slope. Remember that graph, like the second or third slide that Michael showed? That's a pretty steep slope to move to where we want to go. It's a little bit of the consequence of the inaction of the last 2 decades, if you will, in this problem that we've kind of known about. And the more you delay, the steeper it gets if you're trying to fit within what science says. So it's a balancing effect of, like, you can adjust expectations, but our planning process is about how do we achieve the goals that are set forth. And certainly I think the fires and all this stuff shows that there's sort of real reasons why that makes sense to do it. So that's it certainly is the challenge of our time here, is how do we actually make those things happen, and whether it's that one specifically that gets adjusted. So what else fills in behind? How do we electrify more vehicles more quickly? What's the trends that will push that forward? I think the discussion we've had already about working from home more and reducing VMT as a result of that for those that can, and maybe having more busing available for people who are essential workers where that type of thing is short. Those are, you get into so many different solutions that can help you move in that direction. So there's not just a one path solution, but it's really kind of pushing on multiple fronts to see how far we can go in each place. So other concerns, other thoughts, Nancy?
Well, this is not a concern, maybe a reaction to that wow moment of the buildings and appliances. And I think that it kind of gets to the integration of all of our agendas, right? So if we can engage retailers and incentivize retailers to carry high efficiency stock, or whatever it is, the equipment and appliances, and utilities to continue to incentivize and streamline their rebate process for high efficiency equipment, and educate consumers so that when they have stock turnover, when their water heater breaks or they're putting in a new dishwasher, the only choice they have is for a high efficiency piece of equipment, or that it's a slam dunk, they would go with that piece of equipment, and making sure that there's a huge equity piece there. So it's not, those pieces of equipment have to be as affordable for every community member. Otherwise we're not going to get the turnover rates and the infusion into the system that we need to meet those numbers. I agree with you. It's going to be a challenge, and it's going to require that kind of more systemic thinking about who are all the players involved, and how do we make sure they're all rowing in the right direction. And the repair folks who have equipment on their truck, the only thing on their truck should be the high efficiency stuff. So how do we make that happen, right? It's challenging.
Or the advice that the repairman or repair person gives me when he or she shows up and says, "Don't get rid of this dishwasher. They don't make them, the high quality like they are now." So there's that component, and then there's also the builders, and what the builders, they want quick, and they want to do it standard cookie cutter. So codes and standards also play into it.
That's right.
Thank you, Nancy.
So Mark, to kind of talk about Nancy, I think we have concerns, or I have concerns about the affordability piece of what this plan may look like. I think there's going to be a widening disparity between folks who can afford and folks who cannot afford, and there's not a clear path in an equality piece in what's being designed here, and that really needs to be addressed. So that's kind of the ground level consumer. And then the other piece that I have a concern with is that there's a competitive nature within any business model, and we have to be very competitive against similar facilities across our state border and also internationally. And I don't see a clear path forward on how we adopt these principles and still be competitive. I don't see how we can be competitive with, again, like businesses in Oregon and Idaho, because they don't have to comply with whatever path we have for decarbonization. And I don't see the same with our competitors in Canada, who do not have to comply with deep decarbonization. So I really am concerned that I don't see this. And I think, for my own hypothesis, when we look at economic activity and tax generation, we have to look at the volume of activity that occurs in any one region specific, whether it's a small community, large community, county, you name it. There's a volume of activity. And I don't see anything in this plan that doesn't disrupt that volume of activity, which could have a very significant impact on our economy. I get that there could be some shifting when you look at changing into some more service-based activities or looking at green technology development. That all comes at a cost. And it's really concerning.
Yeah, thanks. And the economic analysis really begins in earnest to begin to actually see what jobs are associated with this transition. And I certainly appreciate the challenges of actually doing it, both sort of with that justly approach and implementing it. But yeah, we'll begin to look at that and see how to do that. And certainly one of our goals, in addition to equity, reliability, affordability, and competitiveness, is how does this become a competitive advantage for the state as opposed to not. So I think it's helpful to have those those thoughts, and that becomes more sort of front and center as we go to the next phase of the work. Marty, yeah.
Well, like Sandy, I tend to want to jump to tactics because that breaks down the uncertainty a bit. And I was glad to see, I think Poppy had technical roadmaps in her presentation. Not that we have anything to look at yet, but and one of the concerns I have is we're going to demand a lot of components here and natural resources, such as lithium, for instance, to make a lot of batteries. And it's not just Washington State that's going to demand batteries, but Tesla is, and other states. And we're mining the lithium, and in some cases in South America. And so another equity issue is, where do these natural resources come from, and how are we extracting them? It's not just equity for Washington State or inner city Seattle, but there is that. There's also the equity with the future, the unborn here, and that's really what we're trying to solve. We are all going to be gone by the time, if we take no action. The state really does change quite a bit. Farming will change, and a lot of other things. So there is an equity issue with the future we have to deal with, I think, at any rate. But getting back to, I come from West Virginia, where they mine coal, and it was devastating to the state. And so I have a sensitivity to that as far as an equity issue. At any rate, that's my comment.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
Just one last one, Mark. So price of power by BA. So I'm the third cheapest electricity in the country, and I don't want to pay Seattle energy prices, and neither does probably the other BAs in the area. So how do we solve that problem? So on the list.
Can you provide us with some thoughts about that in your comments? It would be interesting to hear your perspective on not paying Seattle rates necessarily, but you've obviously got one of the great deals compared to other people. So what's the way that?
Well, one of the things is that since we're farm communities in Grant County, at least in my town, we're 84% poverty. 84% of the community is in poverty. So, for me in Quincy, I want those power rates down low because people can't afford them. So that's one of the reasons I want to keep it low. And so I think we should look at the poverty levels in different communities, and then just adjust rates to those individuals that are in that demographic of poverty level folks, and just make adjustments accordingly. I don't mind paying a little bit more, but I'd hate to get Seattle prices just because we're all integrated together for this effort. I think we just do it by poverty.
Thank you for the suggestion. Any other thoughts from people? Nancy as co-chair, or any of our state folks, Michael or Kate or Sarah, that are listening in. This is an opportunity if you want to jump into some of the conversation we're having here.
This is Kate. I don't have anything to add. I just so much appreciate everybody taking the time today. It was a lot. And you heard about a little ask we're going to have about submitting a kind of a description of what your organization's goals are on kind of energy. And we'll be sending out an email to describe what that ask is a little bit more, just so you can have more time to think about that. So I just want to let you know about that.
Hey, thanks for that, Kate. This is Michael Furs. I really appreciate the conversation as well. It's been nice to hear from everybody. And what's nice is the dialogue. I'm particularly interested in the reliability questions that Representative Barr has brought up, and others. and how that interplays with the electrification conversation. So I'm looking forward to having some interesting dreams tonight about the integration of the major themes that you all have presented. And assuming that I don't have any nightmares about it, I'm looking forward to the conversation next week. But thank you so much for your engagement.
Send our special group your thoughts when you wake up, your dream cycle, so we can.
Yeah, I'm gonna paint something for you.
Painting, right? Yeah, workshop painting. Yeah. All right. Well,
sorry, this is Sarah. I just wanted to say thank you, everyone. I've really appreciated this conversation. This is Sarah Vorp. I work at the State Energy Office. I'm just really interested to continue the conversation around flexibility that I've heard being, bubbling up during the many sessions today and coming in today. And how does that work with local needs as well as the larger concerns around resource adequacy that Kent brought up? So, I just think, in the deep decarbonization study, you get a very big picture, and I'm kind of wanting to understand better these local issues and how they play into this grid resilience, and what are kind of solutions that can exist across those conversations. And I just heard some very interesting conversations around microgrids and DERs, and then also kind of broader ideas around transmission and distribution management. So anyway, really looking forward to continuing that conversation. And, Rabba Bar, I've really appreciated your perspective today. So wanting to continue to understand those needs, especially during this time where we're really facing that head on with the fires. So thank you, everyone.
all right. Well, thank you all for really, again, for dedicating your whole day or most of your day to this endeavor. The technical team has been working super hard, as has the steering committee and SAFE folks on, getting this organized, and we have a pretty fast time frame to turn it all around. So appreciate your willingness to jump in and provide us your additional comments and to commit all this time so we can really get that input as we move to the next phase. Clearly, it's a challenge to do what we have taken on to do. It feels like we've done a really good job of having a discussion about where we're really needing to go, and then on both the things that we think can help us get there and some of the challenges and issues to address and make sure that the strategy tackles those things head on. And certainly there's no silver bullets. There's no like magic formulas that are going to take all of us kind of working together on this, on this somewhat epic endeavor to, really change the way we use energy and to change the formulation of that energy, but ultimately protect our environment, our health, future generations, and make us more equitable. So no easy task, but certainly exciting and innovating, and will give us lots of lively dreams, I guess. So thank you all. And we'll see you at the next meeting and be hearing from you in between, and thank Nancy as the co-chair and all the team for your participation. Have a good rest of your day, you guys.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Mark, for
Thank you, Mark.
facilitating.
Yep.
Thank you.
Bye.